Okay, here's another Law of Self-Defense Alec Baldwin response video. So in this video, we're going to talk about the jury instructions. Now, this was the jury instructions that the prosecution gave to the grand jury, which they used to get an indictment on Alec Baldwin. This may or may not be the same jury instruction that ultimately gets read in the actual trial. This was for the grand jury for the indictment. And so the Baldwin team is disputing this, and we're going to look at that. Andrew Branca, Law of Self-Defense, he of course agrees with this jury instruction 100%, thinks it's totally on the above board, doesn't see any problem with it, and that. So basically, the way the jury instruction works, this is the uniform jury instructions, and the prosecution has to fill in 4 blanks. And the first blank is the most important. And in fact, Law of Self-Defense has conveniently put the Uniform Jury Instructions, or the UJI as it's called, on his website. And so basically, they got to fill in these blanks, okay? And number 2, 3, 4, and 5 are just kind of more details, like the defendant's name, and the victim's name, etc. But really, this first one, the defendant, Alec Baldwin, and then describe the acts, okay? And so this is the description of the acts, that he discharged a firearm during the production of a movie without first verifying the firearm contained no live ammunition, and while the firearm was pointed in the direction of another. Okay, so this is the main contention that the Baldwin team is making on their motion to dismiss. They're saying that this is heavy-handed jury instruction, that embedded within this jury instruction are burdens on Baldwin that he doesn't have, that there is nothing in New Mexico statute that says that he's required to personally verify the firearm, especially on a movie set. And so that's what's being argued about. Actually, the hearing to consider the motion to dismiss, I think, is next week on May 17th. So we're looking at this just a few days early. So what is the problem about this? So I'm going to focus just on one aspect of this in this video, and I'm going to refer back to my last video where we discussed the analysis of State v. Gilliam from 1955 and how Branca thinks that State v. Gilliam creates an open and shut slam dunk case against Alec Baldwin. So let's look at that. Now, recalling from my analysis last time, well, we have a really interesting situation here where this is almost the reverse problem of what happened in State v. Gilliam. In State v. Gilliam, the prosecution in their bill of particulars had this language in there about how while he was drinking, and the defense wanted those details included in the jury instruction. So it was the defense that wanted more details and the prosecution that wanted less details. The prosecution wanted to focus only on the essential elements. The prosecution won. The court agreed they only needed to include essential elements, and they didn't need to include extraneous details in the UJI. So when they fill out this part, the acts, it doesn't need to say the part about drinking because it's not an essential element. Okay, we talked all about that on the last video. Here we have the opposite problem, okay? Here we have a case where the prosecution is putting in potentially these non-essential elements. They're putting in that he first, without first verifying the firearm. See, so you could almost say that State v. Gilliam said essential elements. And now, in this case, the prosecution is putting in non-essential elements. And so, isn't that a problem? It could be a problem, but why, in State v. Gilliam, why did the defense want more details and the prosecution wanted less details? Because the prosecution wanted to have a higher burden of proof, or the defense wanted the prosecution to have a higher burden of proof. So by putting in more details, that meant it was harder for the state to make its case. Now, So in this case, what the prosecution could argue is that, well, we're not violating State v. Gilliam. We are putting in extra things beyond the essential elements, but that's okay if we do it. If we put in more details, all we're doing is raising our own burden of proof, okay? And it's okay if we raise our burden of proof, but it's not okay if the defense raises our burden of proof by demanding non-essential elements. So that could be an argument that I don't even think they're using State v. Gilliam in the argument for the motion to dismiss, but they are making an issue of this by saying that the prosecution put in language where there's a burden, the way they worded it, there's a burden on Alec Baldwin that isn't an explicit burden in the New Mexico statute, and by putting in this burden that they're kind of actually lowering their burden of proof because they're making it easier for them to prove the without due caution or circumspection. So in this case, I find it interesting that Branca has heavily used State v. Gilliam in a lot of his prior videos to argue that this is a slam dunk case. And now, in this case, we have the opposite problem. We have the prosecution putting in more details, throwing in non-essential details, throwing in burdens on the defendant that he doesn't explicitly have. And if anything, I think State v. Gilliam works in favor of the defense here, whereas Branca has always used it as something that works against the defense. It works in favor of the defense. In this case, in State v. Gilliam, it worked in favor of the prosecution. That's all I'm going to cover in this video. I have a lot more to say about these jury instructions, but in this video I'm just specifically focusing on the tieback with State v. Gilliam.